deep dive because Nick is out of town, but he should still be here on the little doodad on the left-hand side because he is out of town this week.
You gotta keep the consistency going. Somebody's gotta sit there and grunt as we go in. Hey, we're live. I see it on my phone.
Hey, cool,
Look
cool.
at that.
What's
It's
up, everybody?
Like a deep dive inception.
Wayfarer's World.
All
How's
right.
the trip, Nick? How's
Alrighty.
everything in life?
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Wednesday Deep Dive. As you can tell, this one is a little bit different than some of the ones we have done before. I'm not there in person. I am in Savannah, Georgia, hanging out with my family. We're in a pretty sweet Airbnb at the moment. I'm hoping that the Wi-Fi will keep up and we won't have any weird dropouts. But in case we do, we've got a full crew there in person in the studio. Got Noah as usual. Say hi, Noah.
Hey, what's up, everyone?
And then we also have Joey and Raegan for the first time on the deep dive. You guys want to say hi?
Hello.
Hello.
What's up?
So we're doing like I said, we're doing a special one. It's going to be an interesting one. I especially wanted to have Joey and Raegan on this week because of the topic that we're talking about. But before we dive into the topic, I wanted we're going to do our typical icebreaker questions that we've been doing, an opportunity for y'all to get to know us a little bit more. We'll all kind of answer it here. Noah said he's got a really good one, but he hasn't let us hear what it is.
Yep.
It's going to be a surprise to all of us. But Noah's going to spring it on us. So I guess just go for it. Noah, what do you got? What's the icebreaker question this week?
All right, so the question is, if there is one biblical character that you identify with more than any other biblical character, which character is that? Both Old Testament and New Testament are totally you can pull from. So, what is the one biblical character that you feel like you identify with the most?
I can think of
so
somebody.
I'm not going to go first.
Oh,
All right.
no.
I need Joey and Raegan, one of y'all to go first. So
Oh no, I don't know.
I mean, I think I could think of two, and I only think this because I've recently been studying them both. So I would say perhaps Amos. I'll give my explanation in a minute. So I'm reading 1 John.
Okay.
And it's been strange studying that because I had a thought the other day. I won't go into it now because it could be a whole nother one of these deep dives. But I had a thought the other day and I was just praying about it, and I just turned to 1 John, and 1 John had like a lot of very similar thought processes that I was thinking about. So for that reason. But then for Amos, I would say just based on the fact that he was this normal guy that, God just told him like, hey, I know you're not a prophet and all technically, but go ahead and tell all these nations, all these people.
3 times, no,
yeah.
4.
Yeah.
So I think I don't really know why exactly I relate that, but let me ponder on it for a second as Raegan tells hers, and I'll come back.
I'm not ready.
Oh, you're not?
I'm trying to think of the best
trying to buy
answer.
time.
Like,
I can go ahead and give mine.
I can
then,
be like-
and that'll give you time.
Yes.
I'm trying to give
All
the
right.
best one.
What you
like,
got, Noah? What's
I'm
your answer?
Jesus because I am a follower of Christ. That's my answer. I identify as Jesus because I'm a follower of Christ, and yeah, I
Okay.
can't think of anything else.
Okay.
We try to be like him, so that's my answer.
That's good.
That should be everyone's answer.
Yeah, I get that. I would say the character I most relate to is probably Doubting Thomas. I feel like a lot of my life has been asking the same type of questions that he asked a lot of his life. And if anyone has not seen The Chosen yet, The Chosen, I always push this one out here because it's great little show that basically walks through the life of Christ. And you can download the app for free, get it. Go watch all 8 episodes. You don't have to do any type of streaming service. They've made it completely free for you. You can stream it from your phone to the computer. It's great. But the character that plays Doubting Thomas in one of the episodes of that series is just like tit for tat, like my favorite character, and so yeah, I relate a lot to Doubting Thomas. So yeah.
Brilliant.
What about you, Nick?
Well, I want to hear. Did Joey? Did
I
you
think so.
figure
I
out
think so. I think
why Amos?
I do the thing that I do a lot of times where I say, let me think about it. I'm actually not thinking about it because I'm just so listening to whatever somebody else is saying. But I think I can quickly come up with. So I think just the fact that Amos was this run-of-the-mill guy, so to speak, that the Lord still used him in that way. I think I love that picture that's painted there, because I feel like sometimes on some days there might be times where I feel like I'm not worthy of whatever the Lord has convicted me of, or has instructed me to do individually. Yet I look at someone like Amos who he didn't question it. He just was like, God's telling me to do this, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's I don't know if it's more that I identify that so much as I find inspiration from it, but I suppose you could say both.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's good.
No, that's cool. Can I say the guy that died falling out of the window because he fell asleep when Paul was preaching?
You totally can. He's unnamed, but man, that's a funny story. So.
No, I'm just kidding. I just like sleep a lot, and I feel like that could easily have been me. Didn't go any deeper than that. No, but my serious answer is probably Apollos.
Oh, yeah.
Mostly just because it seems like he was pretty he's like a high achiever kind of guy who just got started before he knew what he was doing. He just immediately jumped out there and started preaching and all kinds of stuff. And I think in the book of Acts it says that Priscilla and Aquila had to pull him aside and be like, hey, look, you're doing really good. It's really awesome that you're this enthusiastic about everything, but you may have gotten ahead of yourself a little bit. We need to fix your doctrine a little bit, fix things up a little bit. And I feel like that's just kind of been the story of my life, where I've just been, I start and then figure it out as I go. After already having started, I probably should learn to have a little bit more preparation ahead of time. But a lot of times, a lot in my life has involved just straight up, just jumping in head first right from the beginning, and then having to have other wise people come along later and be pull back on the reins a little bit and kind of get me going on the right path. But the other reason I think I like Apollos is just because he seems to have been pretty successful later on in his ministry after that as well. And yeah, he just doesn't get as much credit as some of the other early church planting, traveling apostle kind of people. And I think his name, it sounds cool too. So that too.
Yeah. Apollos. All
right. Cool. No, that was a perfect question. Good icebreaker question there. No, got us all thinking there. Got us all thinking deep as we get started out on this deep dive. So, like I said at the beginning, what we've been wanting to do with these deep dives has been a little bit of covering some things that we just haven't been able to cover in the sermon. So sometimes that's been a little bit more in depth on the sermon topic itself, but other times it has involved covering particular verses that weren't covered in the sermon originally. And so that's kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to cover a completely different set of verses. We're still in Genesis. In our sermon series, we've been going through Genesis, but we're going to jump right to the end of that first section of Genesis, that Genesis creation story, mostly because when we were on our trip to help out at that camp a couple weeks ago, the four of us here that are on this deep dive, we were all sitting talking just over breakfast, I guess it was, and we were talking about some of the topics that come up in this verse in Genesis. And I thought the conversation was really, really cool. The whole time we're talking, I was just we need to just repeat the same conversation, but just do it on camera so that other people can be edified by it as well. So I'm jumping ahead to, like I said, it's the very end of that first section of this creation story. It's Genesis 1, starting in verse 27. So I'm just going to read it through, and then I'll kind of explain a little bit about what I was thinking, and we can kind of go into the the topic from there. But Genesis 1, starting in verse 27, says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.' And then God said, 'I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food.' And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good, and there was evening and there was morning on the sixth day." So that description is of the very last day of creation before God takes a Sabbath rest. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. There's all kinds of different topics that we could really do deep dives in. But the one that's always been really interesting to me is specifically verse 29, where God is describing the fact that he says, "I give you to the humans, he says, 'I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, and they will be yours for food.'" Basically saying that the plants and the fruits of the trees is what he gave human beings for food. And the interesting thing to me about that is that he doesn't specifically mention meat at all, any sort of meat as given for food in that original Genesis creation story. And a lot of scholars believe that that was kind of God's intention from the beginning. God's intention for human beings was to be plant eaters, herbivores, I guess. That was what God intended for human beings in Genesis. That's what we can see from that Genesis creation story. And what's really interesting is that the very first time that eating meat as food comes up for humans to be able to eat meat as food is after the flood. So skipping several chapters ahead in Genesis chapter 9, and I'm going to read that verse for us right now too. So this is after the flood with Noah, Noah's Ark, all that kind of stuff. And God makes another covenant with Noah with the rainbow, and he promises to never flood the earth again. And then there's this very interesting section where God kind of gives them the meat for food for the first time. And so, it's Genesis chapter 9. I'm just going to start in the very first verse. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth," which is the same wording from that Genesis 1 passage. "The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and on all the birds in the sky and on every creature that moves along the ground and on all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands." Which, again, there's just a ton of similarities in the language. And then this is where he says, "Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you now. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it." So, like I said, a lot of scholars believe that basically this is the moment when God is for the first time kind of giving humans permission to eat meat. And it's a very interesting way it's worded, where it sounds like that. It sounds like permission, like, okay, I guess you can go ahead and do this, but you can tell that it doesn't have the same connotations that the earlier section where it's talking about eating plants for food has. And there's a really interesting scholar I was reading one time who kind of said that he really views this as like a permission, a temporary permission that God gives to humans, because at this point humans have just become so bloodthirsty he's like, okay, you will at least be able to eat other animals, but he makes it very clear, don't eat animals' blood, which is why Jews and Christians throughout most of early history have not eaten anything with blood in it. But you can eat meat, and why it goes into this whole kind of section where it talks about not murdering, basically, where for any human being that is killed, God's going to demand an accounting. So all of those ideas are all interconnected. And this scholar that I was reading particularly said that he believes that in the new heavens and the new earth, the new afterlife, the goal will be to return to a plant-based diet as it was in the Genesis creation story, not eating meat. So the interesting thing, we were talking about this a little bit when we were sitting over breakfast, and I was just kind of joking because Joey and Raegan are both, I don't know how y'all would describe yourselves. It's a plant-based diet. What do y'all, what language?
The best way I would explain it is that we're on the transition to eating fully vegan. And at home, it is exclusively vegan, I would say. But then, otherwise, if we're at someone's house who's hosting us or something, at this point, we're not declining. We're not going to be like, I'm not going to eat your food.
Right.
However, that does come with the cost because both of us usually will get sick afterwards after eating because we haven't been eating it at home. But yeah, I would say we're in the tail end of transition of eating plant-based, vegan, whichever you like to say, just avoiding meat and dairy.
Yep. And so my point to them was basically like, you guys are just ahead of the curve at this point. You're like, if that's the goal in the new heavens and the earth, y'all are just have like extra practice on it. Y'all have already started on moving towards that direction. But I think what I was really impressed with as we were talking is that it's not something that y'all have decided to do lightly, and y'all had some very, I thought, well thought out, scriptural and theological type reasons and just kind of logical reasons why you have moved towards that diet. It was some really good arguments that I had never heard before, honestly. Y'all were some of the first ones to make some of those points. And so I figured it might be kind of helpful if y'all could just kind of walk through it a little bit. Tell us the story, how did y'all decide to start moving towards this vegan diet, and just kind of the quick version of what were some of the reasons that y'all wanted to move that direction.
Yeah. Would you like to start, or you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think that it kind of has snowballed into something a lot greater than perhaps was initially thought. So of course we were thinking about it from, I would say for me personally, what I've been saying is it is largely health, primarily because a lot of health issues are very rampant in our family, my side of the family that is. And just looking at what my family has eaten and what, just growing up, seeing that most of the diet was not that great, and it was very like meat. Of course, we ate a lot of sugar and we ate a lot of like processed foods as well. But so that's the big reason is for me to maybe put some of those potential health issues at bay. So I guess
you were trying to be proactive and like head them off from the beginning.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Because something that, so obviously, so I'm not a medical professional, nor have I gave enough medical studying to even say this with full assurance. But I can say that something that Raegan says a lot is when we talk about like diseases or illnesses or whatever that are brought onto us hereditary. Sometimes the hereditariness is not necessarily in our DNA as much as it is our environmental.
Right. Like your lifestyle.
Yeah. So
Just following your parents' footsteps or whoever's footsteps,
So maybe you have diabetes in your family, but maybe that's because
you're
family
eating the same things
that
your family did.
Yeah, that generations before you have eaten and continue to eat. There's a lot of conversations you can have about eating, and and in relation to medicine and how
Right.
it is all very money driven. And of course, a lot of times you find that diet is not really discussed as much as it should be, despite it being what really makes you function. You know, like what you eat is what, and what you drink is kind of what helps your body work.
Right.
That's kind of
so it's like a major part of your health, but it's not something that gets focused on as much.
No.
Initially, y'all kind of moved that direction because of health reasons. You were saying primarily, you know, that was kind of the.
Yeah.
Was it a decision y'all made at the same time? Like how long ago now were you starting to move that direction?
I think that I've wanted to be at least vegetarian for a long time because I've always been like, who thought to cut this chicken open and just eat it? Like, whose brain was that? And so I think it was me at first, but then you were just kind of like reading up on it. And
I think it was just like something that I think we, like eating vegetables, you know, eating plants for the large part of our diet has kind of already been a part of our own personal diets even before we were married. And, you know, as we were dating for the very long time that we were dating, it was like we were already making those decisions, not so much even for health reasons or because of other personal convictions.
Just because we kind of preferred anyway.
Yeah, we actually enjoyed it. So I will say that helped certainly and continues to help with the transition because like, oh, you know, this actually tastes really good and you can, you know. Yeah. But what I will say, just continuing on with this, is that where it has snowballed is, and kind of landed at this current day, is when it comes to our own convictions about just things in general, it kind of boils down to this idea of stewardship and of, I feel like we as Christians especially we should be questioning where stuff comes from, right? And that should be that our food, be that our clothing, be that whatever we are spending our resources on, should be really considered heavily. And Nick, you had talked about when we had this conversation on the trip about like you have to have grace, of course, because otherwise like you become very critical of every little detail, and it's very easily to become critical in every little detail. But I think so. We've already been doing clothing, like that's something that I've been on. That again could be a separate conversation, but it's very related to diet, which is the idea of stewardship and the idea of should we really be eating meat at all, but B as much as we are here in the West, that is right here in America, And
Noah had brought up some interesting points just historically on like. What was it you were saying, Noah, about how often ancient peoples probably did or did not eat meat? What was kind of the background of that?
Oh, yeah. In the Old Testament in particular, I don't know as much on New Testament. This would be more your field, Nick. But I know for like most of the Old Testament, the idea of eating meat every day would not have been even considered. Like it. Most families in the Egyptian and the Israelite, cultures, they would basically have like one cow that they would fatten for the entire year, and they would not really have access to any other type of cattle, really, because cattle were so expensive to maintain. You got to feed it a lot. Anybody that's like a farmer knows that there's a lot of money that goes into raising any type of animal for any purpose. And so for the most part, the Israelites really only had like one major feast that they would really celebrate and eat meat for, which is why like the prodigal son story is such a big deal. Is when the prodigal son comes back, the father kills the fattened calf, and then they celebrate and have a meal. And that's not just kind of like, oh, they ate meat. It's a big deal that they were fattening this animal for a whole year, and then they slaughter it. So that's kind of the historical background of it. Is they were not like us today, where you can just walk in every day and you just see a line of red meat from almost the beginning of the Kroger wall to the very end. It basically spans the entire thing, and they throw out I knew someone that worked at Walmart, and they throw out so much of that because it goes bad before people buy it. So that to me was the big eye opener to meat, was knowing that when the meat industry makes too much meat for people to consume, and the Old Testament had there's not even a close comparison between how much meat they ate in the Old Testament to what we eat today. So
Right. And so that was the interesting thing, just approaching it from like a stewardship perspective. That was something I think I had maybe thought about before, but I hadn't thought about it in depth. I don't know super in depth about around the time of the New Testament, around that, first century AD. I do know that they did eat a lot of, like, the whole daily bread idea when Jesus teaches his disciples to ask God for their daily bread. I do know that that's because that was the major staple of everyone's food. Like, they just ate a lot of bread pretty much every day. That was the major thing they ate. And I do think historically the amount of meat that we eat in our culture now is probably a new level of it that we haven't had before. And so we talked a little bit about that. There's all kinds of history that kind of goes into increases in factory farming and increases in production methods for poultry and cattle and all kinds of different things like that have allowed us to get to the point to where we can even produce that much meat so that we can eat it at every meal, every day. But yeah, historically, at least, that is something that has been on the upswing, and especially in America, especially in the West, it's kind of reached the highest levels that it ever has before. And so, and there are just a lot of documented facts about the fact that the way a lot of that meat is produced in those factory farms is very inhumane. It's not, the way the animals are treated is not, it's just inhumane. It's cruel in some ways. And even in the Old Testament, Noah, you can probably back me up on this, but I mean, there's a lot of specific laws about the ways the animals are supposed to be slaughtered. And a lot of the implications of the way those laws are written is that it needs to be the most humane and caring way to kill an animal. You're not supposed to let it bleed out. You're not supposed to choke it to death. You're not supposed to do all these things. That is what is happening in the meat production industry in our culture today. And so I've heard a lot of Christians at different points in time say that they want to be specific about the clothing they buy, because they don't want clothing that's produced in sweatshops with child labor and in immoral ways. And I guess that's just what was interesting to me, was that I had never considered food in those same categories. Mm-hmm. But I do think both Joey and Raegan, y'all make a good argument in that direction about food also being another one of those areas that we should consider that we're doing that our food is being produced ethically. And one of the ways that y'all have decided to do that is just to cut out meat and focus on a vegan, plant-based diet. Yeah. And so I thought that was a like I said, just an argument and one that I'm still thinking about. It was a good argument and gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah, we're still thinking about it.
I will say, like, to that point, in the Old Testament in specific, the process of sacrificing an animal was not this, like, cut the throat and you're done kind of thing. It took 5 to 6 hours to go through the entire process. We've mentioned it before, but there's a podcast called On Script in which one of the co-hosts of it, Drew Johnson, he will take his entire student body from King's College over to Israel, and they'll actually go through the process of an animal sacrifice over there, so that everyone that's studying Old Testament Jewish literature will actually have the experience of knowing what an animal sacrifice is like. And What?
I do remember Drew Johnson specifically on that episode. He was saying one of the interesting things about it is, this is another point we talked about. We ourselves are so separated from the process of killing animals in a way that all other cultures of human beings have not had to be. So like we don't ever see the animals alive. We just go to a grocery store and see them already cellophane wrapped and prepackaged, and so we don't consider the fact that that was a living thing that came from. Whereas other human cultures, every time throughout history, when they slaughtered an animal, it was often an animal that they had raised and that they had like known, for lack of a better word, for its entire lifetime. And so the sacrifice that animal was making so that they could eat, was something that they knew very well. And the realities of the fact that an animal had to die to produce this food was also something that they knew very well. And Drew Johnson said that's one of the crazy things when he takes his students to witness one of these ritual slaughterings, is that they just get really uncomfortable because they've never had to be around the killing of an animal or the killing of anything like that. And it's gory, it's stomach turning, and all of those things really just helps to, I think, make a better connection between exactly what is happening anytime that we are consuming meat. And I think as a culture, that's something we miss sometimes because we are so separated from it. We are so far removed from it. But yeah, I just thought that in general, that was a really interesting argument. So getting back to kind of y'all's story a little bit, I was still kind of wondering, I'm still trying to get the timeline. Like how many years ago was it that y'all started moving this direction? And then, what are some of the other thought processes that y'all have had along the way that have kind of helped push you further and further towards that vegan plant-based diet?
As far as years or just an actual like specific time, I'm not really sure I can give one exactly, but I will say within the last certainly year, like I would strongly say a year, but probably 2 years is a better timeline in terms of whenever we're actually maybe talking about it more and being more aware of why we're making choices the way we're making it in terms of what we're consuming, both from a, anything that's not food to food. The clothing and the food thing, like I said, go very hand in hand. I think.
So what have y'all been doing clothing wise? What has that looked like for you? In everyday life?
That is a very long conversation, admittingly, and I don't necessarily have a way to summarize it quickly. I don't think. What are some things maybe you could share about that?
For me, it would be like going to secondhand stores. So maybe like go thrifting instead of going to H&M or,
But why? Like, why would you say? What's a reason for you for that? I think you have the experience part too of seeing.
Yeah, so I've been to Haiti and Puerto Rico, and I've seen a lot of things as like, I don't know, like slaves and just like children not having a lot, and then just me going to H&M buying this $5 shirt when it's literally killing someone is not right to me. Like, it's not just. So that would be my experience with that.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's a step further, and I don't have the experience of visiting somewhere that's not America, and we don't have the insane rapid production of clothing, like we do here in America, but like not seeing other places. I think being able to see that firsthand is a very similar thing to what you were saying, Noah, about this guy who takes people to see seeing it physically, I'm sure is
definitely changes
your perspective
a
perspective shifter. Absolutely. But for me, it's even a step further. It's kind of like this idea of like, there are so many people that have nothing, but so then how can I justify having this closet full of things?
Right.
Or, and the other question that I ask myself is like, just because I may have the means to purchase a lot of things, be it clothes or any other things, should I actually be purchasing a lot of them? And that's when it kind of like leans into this idea that I've been slowly adapting, and it's just because I'm learning more about it, which is like just the idea of minimalism and having less, because we take advantage our luxuries. And I think, again, as Christians, we should be extra mindful of the luxuries that we have. Because I think we have, we're accountable to someone higher than ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And I think how can I say that I feel this way about, slaves, or how can I say this, but then look in my closet and see just a full, so much more than I'll ever even need. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And then I'm even a step further where like I don't even, thrifting is great. Thrifting is probably the first step that one should take maybe in moving towards avoiding fast fashion. There's a documentary called The True Cost. I think it came out in like 2013.
I think it's 15.
15. So it seems outdated, and the way it's shot is a little bit outdated, but it has some very good resources and content that I would suggest anyone who's interested on the subject of fast fashion look into. There has since been plenty more. But I would say looking at it from a perspective of, do I actually need this much stuff? Do I actually, who is it really benefiting? And just, the overall idea of stewardship. But, let me go back. I'm really bad about this. The difference about thrifting and stuff, like I don't even want to thrift anymore. Honestly, going into stores that have excessive amount of clothing at this point just kind of makes me like, it saddens me deeply. And every time I walk away from those kind of places, I feel like very weighty. And I'm coming to understand that this is something that should be viewed as a overall conviction, but it is a very personal conviction for me. And I have to keep that in account when I'm talking about it with people. But like I don't want to go if I don't know every part of the process, I don't think I really want it. And it's because, like I said, I have the means to purchase something that maybe is more expensive, yet I know where it came from. Why would I take that option? And it's because it's easier to take the cheaper option because it makes us feel even wealthier than we already probably are.
Right.
You can go into H&M and buy, 2 giant sacks full of clothes and feel good because like I can afford to buy all of this. But when in reality you just
supported something that probably killed someone.
Or was, at least if not killed someone, was very damaging to their well-being, and just and boosted your greed and your lust for worldly possessions.
So you see like both meat and clothes as like in this category of like you want
excess.
To support like things that you absolutely know exactly every part of the process that got you that piece of clothing or that piece of meat. And you want to be fully you want to have the confidence of knowing that yes, every part of this process I support. Is that kind of basically what it is?
And of course, there's plenty of times like there's when I go into a grocery store, there are probably all sorts of things that I'm just learning about that I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't buy from this. And I think this is again going back to what I said at the beginning about what Nick shared about grace, and like you must have grace with yourself, otherwise you're going to and realize that the Lord obviously gives you grace. You're going to like kill yourself essentially worrying about all these little things.
Right.
Unless you're, a farmer on your own land and you're off the grid. There are some things that are a lot harder to avoid, but I don't think it's impossible to avoid. I think it just takes us as consumers being a lot more conscious and putting a lot more due diligence and footwork into the consumption of of how we're.
Because I think, Nick, you said at one point that you don't necessarily believe you can do it for everything, right? That you almost have to pick and choose. Is that what you said, or am I?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, in general, I connected a lot to the concept when the Apostle Paul is talking to some of the church in Corinth, because some of them have a lot of issues with eating meat that you can buy in the market, because a lot of the meat that they might buy in the market was likely used as a part of a pagan temple sacrifice. And so they're conflicted as to whether that is morally right or wrong. And it is interesting to me that that's one of those situations where it does seem like the Apostle Paul gives you freedom to follow your own conscience. But I also think it's important to point out there is one section where he basically just says, just don't ask. He's like, don't raise questions of conscience. Just, accept it thankfully and from God. And then he says, unless the like you're going to eat at someone's house and that person offers you the meat and they purposely tell you, by the way, this was sacrificed at the temple or whatever, then it's a little bit different because they've like offered the information to you, and he tries to tell them, just at that point you shouldn't eat it, not for your own conscience, because again, there's grace, receive it with thanksgiving, it's totally fine, but maybe for their sake, for the sake of the other person is who you need to be thinking of. And so that issue, the meat sacrifice to idols issue, you can just Google that phrase, meat sacrifice to idols, and you can just find a million articles about all kinds of different people talking about that issue, because that was one of the early issues for a lot of the early church was meat, and meat sacrifices were a huge part of the pagan temple cult. And so they were kind of conflicted as these Greek and these other Gentiles would become parts of the church. One of the big struggles that they always had was, so what does this mean about the meat? What does this mean about the temple? What does this mean about the cult stuff that we used to be a part of? And so you see in several books of the Bible that particular topic come up over and over again. But I think part of what you see Paul doing in that sort of like the attitude that he has towards it all is just the difficulty of the fact that when you do live in a sinful world, it is kind of impossible to fully separate yourself from the sinful practices of the people around you. And I think that's kind of been my main point. Like you can avoid stuff that's produced with basically slave labor in sweatshops, and you can avoid meat, but that doesn't mean you might still be consuming plastic, which is produced in a lot of through fossil fuels in a lot of ways that could be unethical in that way. You could still be using an iPhone, which Apple as a company has been accused of a lot of unethical practices. And I think the reality Paul is recognizing is that if we get to a place to where we are going to try to avoid all, if we get to a place to where we're trying to avoid ever coming in contact with anything that was produced in a sinful way, that's basically an impossible task where you just have to leave the earth for that to happen. But that doesn't mean that you don't still allow God to convict you and to move you in the direction that he wants you to, because I still think God's desire would be for all things to be produced in sustainable, ethical ways that are good for human flourishing, good for the flourishing of the planet. And so any small decisions we can make to move that direction, I firmly believe are pleasing to the Lord. But it's just with the understanding that it's going to be impossible to be fully consistent in that, because the only way you could ever do that would be to just leave the earth completely. And so I think that's kind of the balance that we need to have. But I think what I was just really encouraged by was that you guys had been thinking about that. It was obvious that you had been allowing the Lord to help you think through everything, even the specific types of food you eat or the clothes that you wear. And that sort of like thoughtful intentionality behind the way that you're living your life is definitely something that I think is very commendable, and that I would want in my own life and just for any Christians, especially around me. And I know that it's like a really hard thing, so I respect y'all's desire to do something difficult. I imagine one of the difficulties of it, though, may be having the conversation with other people, maybe the reactions from other people. What has been y'all's experience as you've talked about some of your convictions related to this with others. What have been the reactions you've gotten from other people? Has that been difficult? What's that been like?
You share. I've been talking a lot, but I think you can talk a lot about this.
Some have been supportive and some have not been. Some have been very negative and, what would you say, like almost like belittling?
Just like, I think it's a lack of understanding and a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
That might come.
They're like, but you need protein, or this is natural, and you're like, but is it really? Like, do you understand how it's processed? Do you understand like what's happening? And I think a lot of people don't, because maybe they're just used to something, or they have this fake reality in their head.
Or perhaps they, because like you said, Nick, it is challenging. Maybe they just don't want to introduce that idea of challenge, right. Or because it's normal,
Or maybe they haven't even realized that it is greed. Like you desiring that maybe is greed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it becomes really difficult, and this is spanning anything with food or drink, I've found, to sacrifice any type of pleasure for some idealistic betterment of the world, I think everybody agrees that like alcoholism is bad, but if you ask, and most even alcoholics would say that, but then if you ask them to stop drinking, that's an issue, and I think it's like one of those things where we have disconnected what we do from what we believe a lot of times, and so when I think, especially in my life, that's the thing, is like I believe everything that y'all say, but it's like I haven't actually taken those steps yet. Because it's that there's the part of me that's like, yeah, but meat tastes so good, like it's just I totally, I'm not in disagreement with any of the facts you guys present. It's it's strictly a pleasure thing.
Sure.
And I think that like having it takes a certain amount of like will even to like sacrifice that pleasure for something that you believe is better, and I appreciate that both of y'all. I know a lot of people that talk about this issue. I had a lot of people at Avenue that were very, very concerned about the meat industry, and I appreciate y'all a lot, because a lot of the conversations people would have were always a little pushy, they were always very like, try and rightly so. Like the more and more you investigate the meat industry, the more and more you realize how bad it is. And I'm not saying that's wrong, to make those arguments and make those points in conversation with one another. But the way that they went about it was you got to change this now, and the very, I guess not understanding that so much of our culture is so ingrained in it right now that like, that takes time, and that takes progression, and that takes many conversations, not just one,
Right.
Absolutely.
And I guess I appreciate that both of y'all are willing to forgive, even though you all don't believe, I mean, we went to camp and they serve mainly meat there. So, I just appreciate that y'all have enough grace of that to, be able to deal with that. So,
I think it certainly is a discipline thing.
Yeah.
Just overall. I think, like I said, and I mentioned at the very beginning, which is that like the in transition, and I think I'm going to always maybe use that in transition of being this or believing this way or living this way, I should say, rather. And it's because like we have those times where we're going to have to. And isn't even what Nick was saying. It's like, well, because either we do or we don't eat it all. And I guess we could not eat it all, but is that really what the Lord would want us? And I don't really know.
Yeah.
I feel like I was going somewhere else with that, but it being a discipline. It takes, again, it's like if you are reading scripture every day, eventually that becomes something that feels weird that you're not doing.
Yeah.
Right. And
Very
I think
true.
it's kind of like why, or you feel off or you feel weird because you're like,
Right.
and then you remember, oh, I have not spent time in the Word today.
Yeah.
I feel that frequently, right? Or like I'll feel off. Even today, like I had a weird off day and I felt unlike myself. And that was a funny story that we want to share. But I was feeling impatient, and that's very against my normal virtue, I guess. Like I feel like I'm very good at being patient. But today, like I did not make time between all my other tasks, including work today, to read the Word, and it impacted me. And in the same way, whenever with this diet thing, whenever we are put in positions where we may have to eat differently than we would desire, or that we feel like we're convicted to eat, we kind of pay the consequences, from our body's perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's just kind of, it's just it's discipline based. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think too that one's harder because there's a lot of people that are like, well, yeah, it's my body. I can do what I want with it. Like,
Sure.
well, why are you telling me what I can and cannot eat?
Right.
And I probably held that view for a long time. And I think there is, in some sense, like an ounce or two of humility that has to even be in you before you really are willing to listen to that, and so, I think, I'll never, like this year, 2020, I gave up meat for Lent. And so I did 40 days fast of meat during Lent. And I had a lot of people that were like, oh, that's like I could never do that or whatever. And I think part of the reason I wanted to do it was to see if I could, and see what the effects were and things like that. And so if anyone, listening to this is, thinking about it, I totally advocate like using Lent as sort of like a short fast from something that you may like find and discover that when you give it up, like you actually become healthier. Because that's how I felt. Like I did the 40-day fast and I felt like I was a healthier person, and like it felt. I've talked about my depression before on this podcast, and I think a huge part of depression is actually related to food. Like I think that if you're eating fast food every day with meat and preservatives and things like that, there's just something in it that depresses you. I don't know. And I think there's a lot of scientific studies that are starting to talk about that and talk about the side effects of cheap food that you don't think about, that you just just eat nonstop almost, that has these mental side effects that can cause either, this with coffee. Coffee can cause anxiety,
Right.
it's that food has mental effects on us as well.
Yep.
And so, that to me was an eye opener when I did it in Lent season, realizing just how much food affected my mental state. So
Right. I think one thing that stuck with me, someone said, well, are you worshiping the animals by doing this? And my answer would be no. I am respecting what God created, and I'm respecting it in a way that is like, I don't know. I don't want to mass produce something that God didn't intend, if that makes sense. So if you're wondering if we're worshiping animals, no, we are not. But that really did stick with me.
Yeah. It's more of an honoring and fearing the Lord in that way. And again, that goes back to personal conviction, of course.
Yeah.
Right? Because even what you said, Noah, was that, but some people are going to be like, but why do you got to tell me what I can and cannot eat or can and cannot do? And it's like, well, you're right. I'm not God. I cannot tell you, but I can say that these are my convictions. Yeah, these are my convictions. And I think to deny that conviction is kind of silly.
Right.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah, if I had to kind of wrap it all up in a bow a little bit, because I think we've been talking about it, kind of a few different threads. The first one is just kind of the issue of self-control. That's something that Noah and I have talked a lot about in off camera at different points of time, just in the office. But in Galatians, when the fruit of the Spirit is mentioned, the things that come from the Spirit. It's mentioned, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. All that stuff is awesome. Everyone, even the non-Christians I know, are just like, yeah, that sounds great. I would love to have that. But then the last one is self-control. And I know a lot of people that would be like, that one doesn't sound as fun. Like that one doesn't sound like as touchy-feely and great as as like love and joy and peace. But the more I read through a lot of the scriptures, the more I find that our own desires can be hijacked for bad things. Desiring things can kind of get out of control. It can kind of become rampant, and that seems to be a lot of what you guys are talking about. There is you feel the need to have a check on certain desires as something that is commendable, something that we want to focus on. And I think that really is something that I would say just kind of across the board. I really do think self-control should be a defining marker of a Christian. And Paul himself even says that self-control is a part of the fruit that the Holy Spirit produces in Christians. So I think the frustration a lot of us have had is that we've just known a lot of Christians who consume and consume and consume and seem to have very little self-control over the desires that they may have in their life. But then that leads to the second thing, which is just like, well, then it's just the difficult question of trying to decide which areas are we going to try to rein in, which areas are we going to try to focus on. And different people are going to have different convictions about different areas. And I really do think there needs to be an understanding and just a realization that in general, wanting to be just like perfect overnight, flip a switch, and you're no longer involved in any sort of excess in any way, is not possible this side of God remaking the heavens and the earth. The sort of legalistic desire to push for perfection can be just as detrimental to us as well. So the path forward that I found that ends up being the most helpful is to really lean into the fact that I think one of the amazing parts that is mentioned of one of the amazing aspects of Christianity as opposed to other religious traditions and religious practices is that it really does emphasize human beings walking alongside God and God walking alongside us. And the Holy Spirit being present there with Christians is like a really, really awesome thing. He himself, the Holy Spirit in the New Testament, is described as the one who comes alongside you, the one who's going to come alongside you and help you, and he's going to guide you in every way that you should go and guide you in the ways that you can please the Lord. And so that's just been my general encouragement to anybody. As you are going forward, trying to decide what are going to be the things that I'm going to have convictions of, what are the things that the Lord wants me to exercise some self-control in, what are the ways that I can live my life in a way that's pleasing to him. The encouraging thing is that we are not just left on our own to figure that out, but God's going to come alongside us and help us. And he's going to have different things for different ones of us at different points in time. And so we just kind of should each need to be faithful as we go along the way. But I think we've reached about the end of our time. I don't want to go on any longer here. Do y'all have any other finishing points, any ending points you wanted to end with? Is there like just one last thing you're like, I want to make sure I say this before we leave? No,
I think thanks for having us on, and also I think no, I don't think I have anything else.
I did the same thing one week. I was like, nah.
You said no, but.
I think if there's anything that anyone who's listening to this could take away is that let's, especially as Christ followers, encourage one another to to walk in grace and, like Noah said, humility.
Yeah.
I think humility is key to all of this, certainly. Of course, self-control, like Nick you said as well, but I think it takes humility to have self-control.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Yep.
Yeah,
5 cents,
I like
7
that.
cents.
That's a good way to end it. Well, speaking of meals, I'm gonna go have dinner. So I
Meat field dinner.
Oh.
I got a list of restaurants to go check out from Joey and Raegan. So I think we're gonna try to see what our options are for dinner
Let's
tonight.
go.
And I guess I will be thinking about a few of the different things that we've talked about today.
Perfect.
But I'm ready for it. So I will see you guys here in a few days on Sunday. For those of y'all that are watching live, I would encourage you to tune in Sunday at 7 to our live stream. We hope to see all of y'all there and hope to see you next Wednesday for